All right. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be back in Seattle. I used to live here a long time ago, and I always enjoy coming back, especially when the Seahawks have a victory parade at the exact same time as my talk. So what I want to talk about today is metrics, but metrics in the context of UX strategy. UX strategy is getting definitely more attention as we sort of get out of the usability lab and pushing around pixels, trying to think of the larger picture. And I think data, specifically quantitative data, excuse me, plays a very key role in that. So the first question is, well, how do we create great design? And all of you probably have some ideas about this, of the importance of listening to your users and observing how they use your product, and having great communication in your team and buy-in. And all these different things kind of go into creating great design, or at least we like to think. But really the question I have is, how do we know when we have great design? Is it just something that is a gut feel, or is it getting accolades from our boss or our boss's boss, or is it the lack of complaints? How do we really know when we have the right design? And I argue that it's important to get data that gives you an indication or tells you something about the quality of your designs and specifically how to make them better. Thinking about metrics really is about kind of a user UX research framework. You need to think about it at a larger level. And metrics or data is about, or research is about answering questions. And in user experience, there's a few fundamental questions that most of us are asking. So we can ask questions that are kind of a qualitative nature. Why is this a problem? How do I make it better? Sometimes we have questions that are more quantitative based. What's the problem? How big is the problem? I need to measure the problem so I can prioritize it. And we also look at kind of the range between user behaviors, what are actually people doing, and what they're telling us, what their attitudes are, what people think. And so any number of our different research methods can kind of fit in this grid. On the upper left, behaviors that are qualitative, we go into the lab. We do small sample size usability testing. In the upper right, things that are quantitative about behaviors, that's what all of our analytics are for. Qualitative, things around attitudes, we do focus groups. And we go into the lower right around what people think that are highly quantitative. Usually we're doing some type of online survey. So a lot of our research methods kind of fit within this sort of framework. Now, I want to talk about metrics in the kind of the context of the user experience process. Now, this is a very simplified view of it. We have discovery research or discovery activities to try to get to know who the users are. We do some design, we evaluate the design, and hopefully we do some type of validation. Now, obviously, there's an iterative loop between the design and evaluation, and then there's also a bigger circle of validation going back to discovery. Okay, but I want to kind of think about metrics in at least these different kind of stages of activity related to product design. So the first is discovery. Okay, discovery is everything that you need to do before you start design work. So you need to understand who your users are. You need to understand what their needs are, what their current experience is like. Everything that's going to help you get an advantage to create great design. And there's a lot of wonderful qualitative research methods that are a very important part of discovery. I want to talk about two things of ways to bring metrics or bring data into the discovery process. Now, most of you are probably familiar with personas, and I've been doing personas for a long time. They can be very valuable, but what I found in my career is many personas collect dust on the shelf. They're just not used the way that we think that they're going to be used. We have very grandiose ideas about personas, and we can sometimes spend a lot of time and money developing them. And one of the reasons why they don't get used is because they don't have buy-in from other groups, especially people in marketing, right? And part of the reason they don't is because it was more qualitative. It was more just coming up with these personas. Now, the act of creating personas can be very useful, right? But it's what you do with them as an artifact. And I want to talk about kind of three different activities that you can do to kind of get more power out of personas. So, for example, you go into the field and you do some research and you come back with all these different interviews with all these different types of people. And there's two different activities. One is factor and then discriminant analysis. And factor analysis allows you to take all of your qualitative data and basically convert it into like scale data and then reduce it to figure out what are those main variables. Like if you have questions about comfort level with technology or security or privacy concerns, you can reduce that into a quantitative way, and then you can do a discriminant analysis to figure out what are those different variables or factors that are all kind of related to one another. And you take the quantitative data with your qualitative insights, and you can start generating personas. So you're combining a qualitative and a quantitative approach. Then you can do a cluster analysis to see, of all the people that you talked to or interviewed, where do they fit into those different groups? And then, probably most powerfully, you can do a quantitative validation. You can have 3 or 4 personas, and you can field surveys to see, all right, what percent of our customer base falls into at least one of those 3 or 4 personas? And set targets and say 80% should be represented by one of our 4 personas. And then you can go to marketing and say, look, these weren't just pulled out of the air, but there's actually data behind this. This is, you probably can't see it, but this is just an example of the results of, in this case, a factor analysis to see what different groupings are for different kind of characteristics of users. And then you can see of all the people, which people belong to each of those kind of clusters or groups, and then the results of a quantitative validation. Say nearly half of our users are a Tony traditional, and 27% are a Sally satisfied. Once you have this data, it can really speak volumes. Another type of discovery research that really can be very powerful is competitive benchmarking. Before even you start, you need to understand what are the UX wins and losses with your product. So you can do benchmarking against your competition and see what works and what doesn't. It also gives you insight into the why. Why are people having a problem here or more successful on your competitors' sites? It helps start the design process more efficiently. When you know the problems, you know how big the problems are, and you even have insight into how to correct those problems or how to improve them, you're halfway home. We find by adding this step, we save a lot of time and money for our clients that we work with. It's a huge time saver, and it's counterintuitive that you're adding a step to save time, but believe me, it works. And it also helps drive future design efforts. When I used to work at Fidelity Investments, and we did this every year, and it was driving all of our design projects. So we could say, here are the big problems. Here's where we're falling short relative to our competition, and this is where we need to spend our design dollars. The next phase is design and evaluation. So when we think of design and evaluation, we're normally thinking of small sample sizes, quick iterative design, and I would argue that there is a place for metrics as part of this. I'm a big fan of tree testing. Tree testing, for those of you that don't know, is a wonderful tool to measure the intuitiveness of an information architecture. It's very similar to, if any of you have done any kind of closed card sorting. And it's really important that before design starts, that you get a solid foundation, that you nail down the IA. Because without the IA, everything else will be a problem. It's quick, it's cheap, and it's very, very effective. Two metrics that are key to a tree test is success. So basically how successful people are once you give them a task to finding where the correct target would be in an information architecture. And the directness, which is basically the path that they took to get there. Did they go up and down, up and down? Jared Spool calls that pogo sticking. So how direct, which is an indication of the intuitiveness. And what's really helpful here is to be able to compare IAs. So you can say, you know what, we've got these 2 or 3 different IAs where we're not sure which one is most intuitive. Should we go kind of narrow and deep or broad and shallow? What about the labeling? You can compare, and you can look at those metrics and say, aha, B makes more sense. Success and directness scores were much higher. It's fast and it's quick, and it definitely should be done on any of these projects. Measuring preferences is really important. What I see over and over again in usability testing is a moderator will ask a question, oh, do you like this color? And the person, yeah, I like blue, right? And then they ask the next person, yeah, actually I like the red version better. How do you really know? Usability is about, testing is about identifying problems through behavior. And oftentimes we take a lot of license and we ask preferential or attitude questions in the lab with a small sample size. And for any of you who've done statistics know that that is not very reliable data that you're going to get. And so what we like to do is measure preferences through online surveys. So we can compare different design treatments and say, all right, here's 2 or 3 competing designs. Which one looks easier? Which one is more visually pleasing? Which one would you have more confidence in using or likelihood to recommend to somebody? We can get feedback around the terminology. Which of these 2 words makes the most sense? Give them a scenario and see how they respond. Importance of functionality. We can do something called the constant sum and say, okay, here's all these different pieces of functionality. Here's 100 points. Divvy them across all the functionality that means the most to you. Okay? Or test out different types of kind of navigation choices, how people navigate. Not actually watching them navigate, but different mechanisms for navigation. So measuring preferences is very, very important. Metrics from the lab. So in the lab, again, normally we're dealing with small sample sizes, anywhere from 8 to 12 participants. But there are some metrics that we can get and get pretty reliable metrics on. Certainly performance metrics such as task success and efficiency metrics like time to completion or number of clicks. We get self-report metrics around ease of use ratings or a SUS score, confidence ratings, a whole host of different things that people are telling us about their experience. And what we like to do is try to aggregate them together into scorecards. So there's different statistical techniques to bring different types of metrics together to have scorecards to say, overall the usability or the user experience of this version of the product is this. And most importantly, it gives us an opportunity to compare across different products with competitors, across different design iterations, or in benchmarking, right? It's really important to have something that is comparative in nature. Metrics by themselves usually don't say very much, but when you have them longitudinally, it tells you a lot more, especially whether you're kind of on the right track. And then, of course, physiological metrics, where you're doing eye tracking or doing some other types of physiological metrics can be done pretty quickly, easily. And the nice thing about metrics in the lab is they normally don't interfere that much with your regular lab testing. Okay? So you can get data pretty quickly, pretty easily, with not sacrificing kind of the qualitative insights that you'd be getting otherwise. Here's one example. Would be kind of a self-report. Years ago, I did some research on looking at expectations and specifically comparing people's expectations to their actual experience, because that is one of the biggest drivers in user satisfaction. So if you ask somebody before they perform a series of tasks, how easy or difficult do you expect this to be? They go ahead, they do the task, and then you ask them, okay, now how easy or difficult was it for you to complete? And you can start plotting out averages across different user groups. For example, if you have somebody who rates something as very easy, expects it to be easy, and it is easy, your directive there is don't touch it. There's nothing to be gained in terms of lifting user satisfaction. If people expect things to be easy, but they're difficult, those are your biggest problems. Those are going to be the biggest drivers in lowering your overall SAT scores. People hate that. Oh my God, all I wanted to do is find the price of this stock and I can't find it. That should be easy, right? Things that are people expect to be difficult and they are difficult, yeah, I told you so that was going to be hard. Those are your opportunities to improve user satisfaction. And things that people expect to be difficult and it turns out to be easy, people love that. That raises your overall satisfaction scores faster than anything. Oh my God, I thought that was going to be a real pain. 2 clicks, I couldn't believe I was done with it. That really exceeded my expectations. People in market research have known this for a long time, and comparing this experience to their expectation is very, very important. And this is just one example of how you can use metrics kind of in the course of your UX strategy. The third piece is validation. So whether it's right before you're launching your product or right after, there's definitely things that you can do as part of data. I'm a big fan of doing unmoderated user experience research. UserZoom is here today. You can talk to them about their product. It's wonderful. And what it does is UserZoom and other products are probably going to be the richest UX data set that you have, because you can get at both the qualitative and the quantitative and look at both behaviors and people's attitudes. You can get a lot of people very quickly. You can get tons of metrics, including things like click paths, and you can also look at the competitive landscape. You can see how are we doing relative to our competition across all these different types of metrics. And I would say it's a really good predictor of what actual experience is like. It's large sample size, you're getting it quickly, cheaply, and it's what I like to call like allowing your senior management to sleep well at night, especially right before launch of a major redesign. It's really important that you can say, listen, we've not only did we get the qualitative insights with a small sample size, but we went large sample size, and we know that this is how people are going to react. It's better than what we have right now. And of course, there's a whole host of post-launch metrics looking at basically like doing some sentiment analysis through voice of the customer. I'm a big fan of A/B or multivariate testing, analytics, and now, of course, looking at all the social networks and being able to kind of mine that data to see what overall sentiment is, whether it's positive, negative, what the trends and patterns are there. That's hugely important. And moving forward, I want to just throw in one slide about innovation. Sometimes people think of innovation as it is a very highly creative process, but I would say that metrics do play an important role. Innovative designs, I believe, comes from research, and one important aspect of research is data, quantitative as well as qualitative data. The metrics help put your insights into perspective. Are your guesses correct, right? Sometimes we love a design, but maybe that's just us. How do you go against 200 or 500 people, right? It puts all your insights. Should we go this way or that way? It offers a sanity check. Should we even pour our heart and soul into this startup. We need to get some metrics that this product is viable, it's serving some user needs. People want that, are going to use it, are going to recommend it, right? Myths and excuses. I hear this all the time. One is, well, I already know the user. I spend time with them. I really have a good idea. Rarely do people really know who their user is. We know some types of users, certainly, and we have certainly met a few of them. But how do you know when you talk to 5 people and your product supports 1 million people, I would say you probably don't know your users. Some people say, oh my gosh, it's too expensive. How could we afford a study with 500 or 1,000 people? It's way cheaper than you think, and in some cases it's cheaper than some of the qualitative research we do. Or they'll say, yeah, but I want to measure like engagement or something that's a little bit more esoteric. I don't think there's any metrics out there that really are what we're after. And I would challenge you and say, I am sure that there are some metrics that do make sense, that you can collect, that do measure the thing that you're hoping it to measure, that there's some, what we call kind of construct validity there. Or we're just moving too fast. We have to get this out the door next week. Some of these techniques, we're talking about hours to get data. Setting up a survey, getting data within a couple hours, and at least getting high-level direction. Just because you're moving fast, I don't think that's a good excuse. So the keys to success in this are, first off, is every metric has its own strengths and limitations. Choosing the right metrics at the right time. Understanding what your questions are and what metrics are going to answer those questions. Triangulation. There's not a single UX metric that tells the whole story. The power is in multiple metrics, right? So if you have metrics around satisfaction or their actual use of it or their confidence or what have you, all different aspects of user experience should be measured different ways, and bringing those together is much more powerful. Numbers, specifically confidence. Years ago wrote Measuring the User Experience with Tom Tallis, and we spent a lot of time in our book talking about confidence intervals and being able to show how confident you are in your numbers, in your metrics. And it's really important to understand statistically what you say is that how confident, how likely are you to be wrong by what you're saying. And it's all towards making, obviously, the right decisions. Aligning with business goals. It's really powerful to understand what the business goals are and how your user experience objectives tie in or fit into that. It's what Don Norman talked about this morning, right, is showing people spreadsheets about we're going to help you achieve your business goals through user experience. And how do the metrics that you choose tie into that? And finally, actionable results. Okay, it's really important to think about your metrics as part of your UX strategy. What are you going to do with them? Is it just good to know, or are you going to be making decisions? You need to have actionable results, saying, okay, this data is going to help us make a decision whether we should go with design A or design B, or how we should prioritize the functionality on this design, or whether we need to stop the launch of this redesign or not. Something fairly minute to something very big. So that was a little bit of a fire hose of UX data as relates to strategy. We've got a few minutes left, and we'd love to entertain your questions.
Firstly, thanks very much. One of the metrics in the Measuring User Experience book, lostness,
yes,
has proved incredibly useful for us in unexpected ways. In fact, in talking about driver distraction while using technology while you drive.
Mm.
But I do think you should write another volume of the book now. Now that we have the age of big data, cheap storage, cheap sensors, the rise of the data scientist as an active player in measuring product. That I think it is a sufficiently large change that we need to take another look at. So have you got another book in the works?
Funny you ask, and I honestly, I don't know this gentleman at all. I preface that, okay, our second edition of Measuring UX just came out in July. So, yes, not only have we done it, the new edition is, and
What's the gist of what does it look like in the age of big data?
I mean, big data is very interesting. And to me, so he was asking about big data as it relates to UX. And in my mind, UX and big data come together around visualizations, how people visualize data. But a lot of the same kind of techniques of doing inferential statistics and looking at trends and patterns. A lot of it, though, I think is around visualization and how people visualize and kind of slice and dice things. We only touch on big data in the second edition of our book and refine a lot of the things that came out of the first edition. But, yeah. Other questions? Yes?
So you talked about qualitative testing, and so I guess one of the biggest challenges is you're only going to talk to 12 people.
Yes.
How is that going to give us any useful information? But you sort of stopped talking about scorecarding. So is there anything interesting about even when you've got a small population that you're going to run through an evaluation or a usability test, having a concrete scorecard as opposed to just your observations of those individuals, is that useful or?
Yes. So, I mean, you definitely can pull metrics from a small sample size. Now, your confidence or trust in that data is going to be lower because of the small sample size. But you can still do it, and you can look at things directional, at a high level and say, all right, we've done 3 rounds of testing, and overall, our overall usability score each time has increased incrementally. We feel like we're on the right track. Or it's going down, I think we need to do a course correction. I think you need to sort of put that in its place. So that's, you are limited with those small sample sizes, but you can still get, I think, fairly useful data, but you do need to kind of frame it that way. But people need to understand when you're doing small sample sizes in the lab, first and foremost, it's about identifying a problem and coming up with design recommendations. And there, the analogy I give is you design a plane and you take it up for 5 test flights and 2 times the landing gear doesn't come down. That's a problem. We don't need to take it up 50 more times. You got to fix that. So you need to understand what the main purpose is. Okay. I think I'm out of time. Yes, I'm out of time. Please come up and talk to me and get my card and have a chat.